Welcome to Partner Path, a podcast that unpacks the venture capital and growth equity ecosystem from a junior perspective. Young entrepreneurs and investors have already had a massive impact on the industry, having started unicorns and launched billion-dollar funds. We discuss these success stories and more by sharing perspectives and advice from some of the industry's most prominent role models.
Today, we would like to welcome Teddie Levenfiche, the co-founder of PerfectTed based in London. Originally from London, Teddie moved to the U.S. to attend the University of Pennsylvania. And after graduating in 2019, Teddie worked as an associate consultant at Bain & Company in LA and then moving to the London office. After spending 2 years at Bain, Teddie officially launched PerfectTed in April 2021 with his brother Levi and a classmate, Marissa Poster. PerfectTed is Europe's first matcha-powered energy drink. Welcome, Teddie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being on. And to start, can you take us back to pre-graduation from Penn? Did you always know that you wanted to become a founder?
Yeah, at Penn, there was always this burning desire to start something. And truthfully, I don't think I had the guts. I think there was a lot of fear. A lot of people that go to Penn had maybe been top of their high school. And then when you get to Penn, you realize that there's a lot of smart people in this world. And at every university, I'm sure it's the same. And the same with athletics. I was playing soccer, as you know, at Penn. And you go from being one of the best in your team to then being average and having to really work to be the best. When I got to Penn, it was amazing in terms of the opportunities that it gave me for career advancement and jobs after. But it also reinforced the sense of, wow, if you go and start your own business, you're competing up against some really, really smart people. So I probably took the safer route in going down the consulting route. But I do think there were some invaluable skills that I learned through that experience that helped me when we decided to start PerfectTed.
And so can you now touch on your personal journey to founding PerfectTed? Specifically, why did you enter the matcha industry?
I always felt like a bit of a maverick. I never felt like I fit in, whether that's through internships that I did or my job after Penn. I always felt like I wanted to be a little bit more autonomous, and I probably wasn't great to manage. My managers probably would have said that I'm hardworking, but a little bit obstinate. And so I knew that I probably, from like a personality perspective, probably wouldn't feel fulfilled or happy unless I was doing something really myself and in that deep water. In terms of Matcha, it's interesting. I actually, when I was at Penn, I wanted to start a coffee company, and I spent some time on a plantation in Colombia. I went down that route, learned, I came up with this idea that I wanted to develop the world's first clear coffee because I loved coffee but didn't like how it stained my teeth. So that was probably the first idea that I had. And I actually spent some time working with some food scientists to delve into whether that was actually possible. It might be possible. I wasn't able to achieve it. Matcha for me, competing as a D1 athlete at university and then later working ridiculous hours as a consultant, it was the only caffeine source that I could tolerate and that wouldn't give me a crash in the afternoon or late at night. And it was funny because I would come into work with my matcha set and I did the whole ceremony and I was researching the traditions and I would get everyone in my office hooked on matcha. And that was in LA where matcha is massive. And when I moved back to the UK with Bain, because I didn't get my visa to stay in the US, I was doing the same and I realized that actually there wasn't that same culture of matcha. And I think a lot of great ideas that have been launched in the UK have been taken from the US where growth happens, especially in food and beverage, 5, 6, 7 years prior to what we see in the UK.
And we'll definitely get into the US versus UK dynamics of canned beverages such as matcha. But to start, matcha is very complex. I've read that you have pan-fried, you have steamed, you have culinary matcha, which is cooking or food grade, classic matcha, and ceremonial matcha, so for higher end drinking purposes. And I know that your company really brands itself on ensuring that it is the highest quality matcha. So how did you ensure that quality and how did you think about sourcing the matcha?
One of the things that we look to is there's a brand called Nadum within Kashmir. Lacalome, I think, did it within coffee. There was a big trend towards disintermediation. Typically, if we were an average matcha supplier in the UK or US, wherever, we'd be buying from a wholesaler in the UK, who then would be buying from maybe another wholesaler in the UK, who then might be buying from another wholesaler in Japan. And there might be 10, 11 people along the supply chain that are gobbling up margin. And so for us, one of the trends we wanted to play into and take advantage of is disintermediation and go directly to the source. So launching this in COVID wasn't easy because of travel restrictions, but it basically involved us networking within Japan to find a grade and quality that we're obsessed with farms that spoke to the values of sustainability that we really cared about. Sustainability, supply chain transparency, organic is a big thing for us, are often taken for granted by consumers nowadays. And so other trends that you've seen in the market is that brands that have positioned themselves as just a more sustainable alternative aren't winning because consumers now demand that as a given. For matcha, that's not really the case. There are so many poor quality, poor tasting options in the market, especially in the UK, that for us to come in with a sustainably sourced higher grade product by networking and just honestly spending the time. The one thing that we saw in the tea category is that brands that were launching matcha were traditional heritage brands that were adding it on as an additional SKU and weren't really putting in the time to develop it as a product, whereas matcha is the only thing we do, right? So if we're going to do that and only do that, we better damn be sure that we're good at it.
And a lot of times it comes as a powder too, where you have to make it yourself. And just to clarify, PerfectTed is in a can to date, and that's your main product line.
Actually, it's interesting. So half of the business is our can drink. So we put matcha in a can, which as a process itself is really difficult because it's not entirely soluble. So the process of putting matcha in the can is challenging, but actually half of our business is matcha powder. So we're the largest matcha powder player in the UK. We have the exclusive contract with Joe and the Juice across the UK, Europe, and Middle East, places like Blank Street Coffee that you may know from going to New York. So half of our business is matcha powder, and then half is the drinks.
And so, what do you think is the biggest misconception people in the UK have about matcha?
Another great question. Wow, you're putting the tough one out today. People always think it's mate. The first thing is like, oh, I've tried this before. It's from South America. No, it's from Japan. So that's probably the biggest misconception.
And how do you view big beverages approaching new trends like this? Like, how is matcha competing with a coffee and different coffee suppliers?
That's super, really interesting question. In terms of just global growth, it's one of the fastest growing teas globally. A lot of major tea and coffee brands are starting to take notice. We actually had an interesting incident yesterday. This speaks to the growth and the sort of disruption that we're causing specifically in the UK. We met a lady who works for Nielsen, which is one of the big market research companies, and she was doing a report for, I can't say who, but one of the large beverage conglomerates. And we were showing up with Prime as the two largest threats to their business within the energy category. So when we first started the brand, and I think this actually is an interesting point just on like broader entrepreneurship and starting your own business. When we first started the brand, the most common feedback we got was that it was niche and that it will never be mainstream. And within beverages, because of the unit economics, you have to scale quickly to gain profitability. Otherwise, you need a ton of funding. It's too niche. You'll never catch on. Matcha's been around for 800 years. Why now? The one takeaway I had from that is that everything is kind of like a niche or bad idea at the beginning until it becomes mainstream. It just takes the right brand and the right approach to a product or a category to drive it mainstream. Like, I don't think anything needs to be inherently niche. And actually, niche is a good thing when you're starting out because you're able to build that cult following. And that's what we were able to do. We were able to build a cult following early on and then take that to the major retailers and convince them that actually, if they just gave us distribution outside of London, we'd see the same response to the brand that we were seeing in London.
And you touched on this a little bit earlier, but is there a big difference between the US and UK adoption?
Yeah, the UK is a lot more nascent of a market when it comes to matcha, but that's like everything. Like kombucha, which has reached saturation in the US 5, 10 years ago, is just reaching saturation here in the UK. So we typically almost up to 10 years behind the US in terms of trends catching on. I don't think that's just in food and beverage, though. I think also across other things. US, I think, just tends to breed a lot more innovation. And actually, that's one thing that we've seen being part of the startup community here is that it's a lot harder to get funding in the UK. The market's smaller, right? So if VC firms or private equity are making bets on a brand in the UK, they need to prove that they're able to scale outside of the UK and specifically in the US, which is seen as the biggest consumer market.
And as I think of stores looking to adopt PerfectTed, you really need to have some level of adoption or popularity in order for it to be a viable option. So I'm curious how you kind of moved from 0 to 1. How did you get the drink in your first couple of stores or chains of stores? What was your strategy in rolling out?
I don't know where our one is, but it really has been a crazy quick journey. So to give you an idea of like the scale, we went from 0 sales 19, 20 months ago to this month, we've done $750,000, which is in beverages really tough because distribution is everything. Our first listing was not the traditional route. And the advice we got when we first launched is go to farmers markets, build a community there, set up a stall, get customer feedback, iterate on the product. Because we had such high ambitions for the brand, and because honestly, I'm a very impatient person, and because of a lot of luck, when we first launched the product, we were so set on acting like a bigger brand than we actually were. And the easiest way to do that when you don't have distribution and much funding is through content. So we invested heavily into socials, Instagram, LinkedIn specifically on the personal brand front, because we had access to that from our consulting days and just like being at Penn and having built that network. And we got a DM on Instagram from a buyer at one of the largest UK health stores called Holland and Barrett, which is equivalent to like a vitamin shop. And we got on the call with him and we thought we were just going to ask him advice. He says, I like the category, I like the product. We'd like to launch you in 432 stores. And we were like, what? We'd produced a couple of thousand cans at that point. We didn't even have the capacity. We didn't know what it meant to supply a national retailer. It would be very easy for me to sit here and be like, the way that we got to 3,000 plus locations in 20 months is by X, Y, and Z. But truthfully, there was a lot of luck. The one consistent thing that comes up as we analyze the trajectory of the business and what we've been doing and what we want to double down on, content and media has been the biggest takeaway. If you look at a brand like Red Bull, they're not set up as a drinks company that produces content or media. They're a media company that happens to sell drinks. If you look at their Instagram feed, it's not photos of cans looking aesthetic with like hot models in the pool. It's people jumping out of airplanes. It's things that inspire people, that motivate people, that encourage people. It's much bigger than a product. The biggest mistake for early stage brands is that they lead in terms of their marketing with the product benefits and attributes. And there's so much noise. Everyone has the lowest sugar, lowest calorie, best tasting product, but very few brands are able to lean into whether it's the American dream or the aspiration of feeling your best self as we do with our products. That bigger picture has been the key thing for us.
So you talked a little bit about what's needed for distribution, and I'm curious to hear what obstacles you guys run into as you scaled from your first couple thousand bottles to scaling to 400 plus stores. What does it take to get from 0 to 1 on the distribution side?
And by the way, 400 stores was a lot for us, but you can't build a business on 400 stores. That was the thing that scared me most. We looked at the business and we looked at the sheer volume that someone like Red Bull is doing in the UK. It feels like a million miles away to be able to get even close to that. And so one thing that was really helpful for us is breaking the journey down to bite-sized chunks and just, we call it elephant burgers, right? It's really intimidating to try and eat an elephant, but if you cut it down into burgers, it's a lot easier. And so the thing that we think about is, okay, maybe we can't go from 0 to the largest grocer in the UK overnight, but we know that if we can get this retailer, this stockist here, prove rate of sale, which is, I think in the US you call it velocity, which is just basically prove that you're selling enough cans per store, per flavor, per week, then you can take the case to the bigger players and be like, look, it's working. Again, I could tell you that we targeted this specific store and whatever, but truthfully, we would sell the product into anyone that would take us. And at the beginning, it took myself and my brother and Marissa going door to door and begging baristas to use our matcha powder or cafes to serve our canned drinks. And actually, one of the biggest wins that unlocked a lot of distribution for us was offices. So we knew that we were, from a finance background, we knew that we were personally using the product for productivity in a finance setting. One of our first big listings was Facebook and their office, which actually drove significant volume for us and allowed us to then approach other offices like Google. So now today we're in Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Amazon, Sky, Twitter, Salesforce, like every major tech or finance office in the UK stocks our product. So finding a niche within a niche, which for us was like the working professional. And I think it took us a while to really understand who our customer was. Today, it's a lot clearer. And we understand that there are 3 main areas that we're going after that don't currently feel represented by the energy category. And actually, I can go into them now because I think it's an interesting segue. But the big takeaway from the journey, and this wasn't the hypothesis from day one. The hypothesis from day one, by the way, was that we're going to create a matcha beverage because matcha is a really fast growing category. We love matcha and we believe that everyone else should love it too, or should have access to it too. Truthfully, when you look at the energy category, there are a ton of people that don't feel represented. There are women that look at Red Bull, Monster, the hyper masculine branding, and think like, that doesn't represent me. There are men like myself that also feel that way. There are working professionals that feel like there's a stigma with having a can of Red Bull or Monster out on their desk because it signals that maybe you got fucked up the night before and and now you're recovering with a can of an energy drink. So those were some of the segments that we're going after.
Interesting. And then I know you touched on earlier kind of unit economics and the importance of scaling the business. Maybe just touch on how those have evolved over time.
The one thing that I wish I had known, how much should our marginal cost be for this business to be viable? You learn this in economics. Make sure your costs are low enough for it to be a viable business. But what does that mean within beverages? If we don't work with distributors and we don't work with retailers, where is this source of information? The way that we approached that was, let's launch the best product we can at a reasonable cost structure. And then as we grow and as we scale and as we learn actually what costs we need to get down to, we'll refine the recipe. Hopefully we'll achieve economies of scale. Truthfully, the biggest cost saving within beverages is in scale. And so very early on, we were actually agreeing to accounts that maybe we'd break even on, but we knew that if we could drive volume through 3, 4, 5 of those, it would become profitable a month or two from then. That's the biggest challenge, is your costs are so high early on because your volumes are so low that you're producing a product at a price that if you're trying to make a profit, people aren't willing to pay for. And so for us, rather than building our pricing cost up and saying, hey, our costs are X, let's add on a margin because people say that you should have a 40% margin and then let's price it at Y, we were like, okay, what do we think a consumer would pay for this product? And then how can we fit our cost structure around that?
Maybe just touching on evaluating the traction and success of the business. What metrics do you guys look at on a daily basis for judging how the business is going and how to potentially refine your strategy?
One of the biggest misconceptions is that when I was at Bain, we were analyzing a ton of data for companies, especially in the private equity group. I was evaluating a shampoo brand and we had access to LTV and CAC and all this D2C stuff that was super helpful to understand like customer retention and how viable the business was. When you're first starting out, you don't have access to any of that data. Why? Well, you don't have any historical sales to go off. And also the second thing for us is we didn't launch as a direct-to-consumer brand. When you ask about the cost structure and how we evaluated that and how we thought about that, beverages are a really shitty direct-to-consumer product because they're very heavy. And so they're very expensive to ship. And it makes sense why the majority of Red Bull sales or energy drink sales come through retail, not just because of the cost, but also the fact it's very much an impulse purchase. So it's the kind of thing where you're thirsty or you're tired, you go to the fridge, you grab a drink, you often want it cold, and you don't want to wait 48 hours to have it shipped, or even 20 minutes if you want to order on GoPuff. So velocity is the biggest thing, which is the number of cans you sell per week, per flavor, per store. At the very beginning, we were seeing a lot of growth that was superficial, and that was driven by new distribution. Our sales were growing, but actually our velocity, so the number of cans we were selling per store, was not. That was something that we should have caught sooner. We don't actually look, okay, how much has our top line grown because of new distribution? We're thinking in the stores that we're currently in, how are we performing? And the best metric for that is same store sales growth. On the D2C side, it only makes up 5-10% of our business, but it's really interesting. We don't look at CAC or LTV nearly as much as maybe other brands do. And that's because we don't currently run any digital ads. Our content strategy and our sales strategy is very much around creating incredible organic content that will draw people in to buy the product or that has the highest potential to go viral, rather than paying for eyeballs through paid ads. I think there are a lot of brands that had success a few years ago when Facebook ads were a lot more cost effective and are now being caught out because their model is just not sustainable. It's incredibly unprofitable.
Very interesting. Why is it, do you think, that virtually all drink brands end up being folded into conglomerates like Coca-Cola or PepsiCo? I imagine it has something to do with the distribution and how difficult it is given the weight of drinks. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on, what is it that forces seemingly all of these brands to fold into one of these huge conglomerates?
There are two things. There is the synergies that lie with folding into a Coke or a Pepsi in terms of distribution. But I also think the majority of drinks brands are run so unsustainably that they have no other choice but to sell, because eventually they run out of money and they run out of funding. In the US specifically, there's the likes of Zoa, which was launched by Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. There are so many celebrity-backed brands that are able to raise huge rounds early on, start running the business unprofitably. Maybe they gain significant enough scale to be approached by a Coke or a Pepsi, but they wouldn't have the funding to sustain that growth alone. So part of it is like, okay, great, there's great synergies in the distribution piece, but I think a lot of it is actually that they don't really have a choice. Where we're different is that we're actually profitable in a second year as a beverage brand, which is insane. And the reason that we are profitable is because we have this other part of the business that isn't pure play drinks, which is the matcha powder, which has been able to fund some of the early drinks growth, but also because we are also a celebrity backed brand. We haven't raised any money today other than Dragon's Den, which is the US equivalent of Shark Tank, which, by the way, was the best marketing campaign we've ever done that was free and got us in front of 7 million people. We have an amazing mentor, advisor, investor, and a guy called Stephen Bartlett, who, if you haven't heard of him in the US, you will very shortly, because his podcast is going to be challenging the likes of Joe Rogan. He gets 30 million listeners per month. And the reach we've been able to gain from that at no cost has meant that we've been able to scale the business profitably. So getting creative with our marketing has been the number one thing that I think has allowed us to differentiate ourselves. And I think actually, had we been more well-funded and had we accepted VC investment earlier on, it probably would have been the thief of that creativity, because we would have looked to billboard campaigns or honestly really unprofitable and less effective marketing channels that are great for vanity, because who doesn't want their brand on a national billboard? But really, like, there's no way of tracking the uplift of marketing levels like that.
I think that's a good segue into Dragon's Den. In the US, Shark Tank has a little bit of a reputation for taking big chunks of the business and not giving a ton of money to the founder. So I'm curious, what are the dynamics of Dragon's Den in the UK, and what kind of sparked your interest to, I'm assuming it's applying for the show?
Yeah, so you can either apply or you can get like scouted. So we were scouted, and we were actually scouted for last season. We decided that the business was too early. I know what you're saying in terms of it gets a lot of heat, but truthfully, Dragon's Den has changed the business and myself, Marissa, and Levi's lives in one night. Your life changes and the business changes. We tripled month over month. The month pre-Dragon's Den versus post-Dragon's Den, you get stopped on the street. It really has been incredible from both a personal brand and a business brand perspective. We do put a lot of emphasis on personal brand. If you see me posting on LinkedIn, it really isn't a vanity thing. It has been one of the most important tools for us to gain listings. And actually, a lot of our customers spend more time on LinkedIn than TikTok, especially in like the working professional world. That's been super effective in terms of marketing. But if we go back to Dragon's Den for a second, so we didn't do it the first year because we were too early. And then the second year, they reapproached us and said, hey, we think you'd be a good fit for it this year. We have a spot in 5 days. Do you want to do it? And we were like, 5 days? And as a founder, we know our business, but truthfully, if someone asked us today, what are your margins across every single account you have? Like, I don't have that off the shelf. As you've seen from Shark Tank or Dragon's Den episodes, the number one thing that can make you look like an absolute fool on national television is not knowing your numbers. We got notified, it's in 5 days. Do you want to do it? And Marissa and I had very different views as to whether we should actually proceed and do that. And it caused the biggest argument that we've had today as founders. Marissa's someone who has amazingly championed ADHD and anxiety, but that also has meant that for her to go on national television is a lot more of a daunting thing than the average person, which makes it even more special that she went on and performed as incredibly as she did. So we argued, we finally came to the decision that actually we should go on. It's the best thing for the business. And then for me personally, one of the reasons I started the brand was I unfortunately lost my best friend right after I graduated from Penn. And we grew up watching the show together. So for me, regardless of what happened on the show, it would be a massive win to just be able to go up there and share our story.
And you had amazing success receiving 5 offers. I'm curious, how long were you in the den for negotiating to receive all 5 offers?
We were in there for an hour and a half, but they only showed 14 minutes. It was the longest segment out of any brand, I think, on that season. And it was amazing. Our D2C website is built on Shopify, and we had our phone out, right, as you're watching the episode live. And the phone could not ping quick enough. For anyone that has a Shopify website, they'll know that ping. It could not ping quick enough. And every time that the camera would zoom in on our logo, or a dragon would be like, wow, this is delicious, you'd see like 1,000 orders come in. No exaggeration. It would be ping, 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 ping. And for days and weeks after, it was the craziest experience ever. And until you go on the show, you don't realize the power of saying, as seen on Shark Tank or as seen on Dragon's Den, which actually has become a massive part of our marketing strategy moving forward.
I'm curious, what is a competing brand? It can be in the matcha, it can be in the canned beverage space, or even the media space that you respect, and why?
Red Bull, massively respect them as a brand and their strategy, what they've been able to build from what was originally a product that was developed for long haul truck drivers in Thailand and then brought over to Europe into the most mainstream beverage. If you go to a corner shop in the UK or a newsagent or a bodega in the US, at least in the UK, and you ask them what are the two most frequently bought products, it's a can of Red Bull and a pack of cigarettes. What I don't respect is the ingredients in Red Bull and the impact that it can have on people's lives in terms of through starting PerfectTed, we've received a ton of emails, outreach from parents, students, people who suffer from heart rate arrhythmia, who have had their PTSD exacerbated, who have developed heart conditions just by overconsumption of caffeine and unhealthy caffeine like Red Bull. Respect them as a brand and what they've built and think it's amazing. Don't respect them as much as a product.
Yeah, they've done a really good job with product sampling and different activation services at events, which I saw that you guys focus on as well, which I'm sure proves fruitful from a conversion standpoint.
100%. But actually, it's interesting because we did our first mass activation outside a set of retail stores last week. We didn't see as much of an uplift as we were hoping for. Whereas we then did another activation, which involved music, dancing, energy, a lot more of the brand concept and values that we speak a lot about. And then we saw a ton of uplift from them. For us, it's not just about getting people to sample the product, but also to understand the brand. And I think that also speaks to what Red Bull have done. When they go and sample, they aren't just like handing out cans willy-nilly. They have those Red Bull can cars, which I think are iconic. They have students that are unfortunately mixing with alcohol, but it's the whole idea around energy, aspiration, extreme sports, F1 that they've lent into that I think has been really effective when people think about the product. When you go to pick up a can of Red Bull, it means more than just like a cup of coffee. I think subconsciously for a lot of consumers, it will mean extreme sports or them feeling like they have the energy to go jump out of a plane.
You're going to be the new Celsius.
Please God, Celsius have done amazingly.
Yeah, tasty. So if you had to pick one and only one, would you prefer to introduce a new consumer to the matcha category or convince current matcha consumers to switch to your brand, and why?
In the UK, we as a brand are very much the category. So because it was so nascent and small, I don't know what our market share is, but if people think of Matcha in the UK, they think PerfectTed, which speaks volumes to the marketing team and what they've been able to achieve. So for me, it would be to convert someone into the category because I think we're probably nearing saturation in terms of existing matcha consumers. But the way that we position our RTD drinks specifically is very much more along the energy route rather than the matcha route. Like people that drink matcha probably will have tried our product, but I think we have a lot of energy drink consumers to convert. And then we have a lot of people to convert that previously wouldn't even shop energy. The number one reaction we get to people that haven't previously drunk our drink but end up drinking it is that they don't shop energy drinks. And you ask them why they don't shop energy drinks, it's because they're unhealthy or they're full of sugar or they give me a crash. Fighting that stigma or misconception that energy equals crash is something that we're working hard to do. Education has been the biggest challenge in scaling an ingredient in matcha that has been around for 800 years, but we started off before in saying is more of a niche category in itself.
Yeah, because I was thinking that your go-to-market would more so be around kind of changing the view, meaning that people really either drink matcha today or they don't. But you're so more saying it's like you're touching on the energy side. Because I mean, most people have probably tasted or have had some sort of energy drink in the past.
100%. And most people will drink energy drinks but won't be satisfied either with the health credentials, the way it makes them feel, or the ingredients that are used. Energy, when people are sampled in the UK and asked why they pick up food and beverage products, energy is the number one reason as to why people buy food and drink. So whilst matcha may be niche today, energy most certainly isn't. And I think that's why the bigger players in the market are taking notice of us, is because the one thing that maintained matcha's niche, I think, early on is its flavor. But if you've tasted our beverages, you'll know that it doesn't taste like matcha. It tastes like fruit. And so we've taken the benefits of matcha, but coupled it up with a flavor profile that is way more palatable to the mainstream.
So for most of our listeners, US based, can we expect to see PerfectTed in America?
Yeah, so we've excitingly got a few listings lined up for the West Coast. But I think we have so much to conquer in the UK that those right now are on hold. But yeah, we'll be over to you soon, I'm sure.
Awesome. And to end every episode, we wrap up with 2 questions. So the first one is, what motivates you to work hard?
The PR response I would give would be that it's ambition and the mission and all of that definitely plays into it. If I was honest with myself, there's probably a lot of fear. I put a lot into this. I took all of my savings and put it into this. I've put 2 years of my life now into this. And so because we've achieved such amazing progress and because we've felt the highs of Dragon's Den or retailer launches or being able to impact people's lives as we have had, a lot of it is driven by that fear of not feeling that same way. When you go on national television, you get emails from people saying how their daughter had suffered previously from consuming too much energy drinks. It was giving her panic attacks, and now she switched to a product and it doesn't give her that problem anymore. I want more of those emails. Like, I want to feel like we're really driving the change that we wanted to see. And if we don't continue to grow and we don't continue to reach more people, then we won't be achieving that mission. So I guess you can say it's a partly ambition to achieve the mission, but also fear that we won't achieve that mission.
And what's one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
The best piece of advice I got is that not all advice is created equal. And what that basically means is that when you first start and you're a young entrepreneur at 24, which I think is what I was when we started, you have a lot of people who are older than you and who may have even worked in food and beverage for years longer than us that give advice or give warnings. And it's scary, right? Because you look at them with a lot of respect and you think that they have the answers. No one has the answers. No one knows. And if you're thinking about starting a business, but you're worried about what a piece of advice someone has given you, or you're worried about it not working out, it might not work out, but you won't know unless you start. The product that we have today is not the product that we launched with. And it's very different, very, very different. I mean, we were meant to launch a matcha latte, not an energy drink, but having just started and pivoting along the way is what got us to where we are today. And I'm sure the product that we have today will not be the final product that we have 20 years from now. What most people don't know about food and drink specifically is that products are constantly being iterated. You may not notice it because maybe the impact on the nutritionals on the back of the can or the back of the label are not so different to you. But starting a business, entrepreneurship is a very long journey. It's very much a marathon. And actually, this probably speaks to a second piece of advice I'd give, is that prioritizing mental health and looking after yourself is something that is really important. Founders in general are predisposed disproportionately to mental health issues. I think partly maybe it's self-selecting in terms of the type of people that decide to pursue entrepreneurship, but also the stresses, the emotional journey, the ups and downs of building a business. And so I'd encourage every founder to look after themselves and their teams, because it's very little, in my opinion, about the product and way more about the team behind that product that are building the brand, and especially for a consumer product that are touching people's hearts, hopefully.
What a fantastic note to end on. Teddie, thank you so much for coming on. And if you're listening from the UK, make sure to check out PerfectTed.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much for having me. That was so much fun.